we could maybe make a start now and say good morning to everybody. There's maybe going to be a few more people going to join as we go on, but I could sort of start on the introductions. Just to say my name's Irene McMaster and I work here at EPRC and I'll be chairing this seminar today. And it's great to welcome you all from some of you just along the corridor at EPRC and others from further afield. We're delighted to welcome Liliana Fonseca, who for many of you will be a familiar face because she's based here at EPRC, but she will be here sharing her research on the topic of the role of universities in regional innovation policies and practices, which she's been working on, obviously carrying on the interest, working at EPRC, but it's also based on work she did before joining EPRC, linked to her PhD. The presentation will last about 30 minutes and then the remaining time we can open the floor for questions and comments and discussion. If you would like to make an intervention, it's the usual raise your hand with Zoom or use the chat function, and we'll keep an eye on comments in the chat and can follow up any questions. Before I introduce the speaker, I'd also just like to let you know that the meeting is being recorded, and that means that you and your colleagues have the opportunity to follow up this or refer to the presentation at a later stage. And we'll make the recording available on the YouTube channel and also share it via email. And feel free as well to share the information further using Twitter and so on about the webinar. So our speaker today, as I've said, Liliana is a research associate here at EPRC, based at the University of Strathclyde, and she is involved in a wide range of projects here, but in particular is managing our net zero industrial cluster exchange network, and has worked on Horizon 2020 projects, one Tracer, which is looking at coal-intensive regions and their transition to more sustainable energy forms. Also worked on our public policy research through IQNet and EORPA. And before that, between 2017 and 2020, she was involved in an early stage research fellowship on it's a Marie Curie Innovation Training Network on the role of universities in innovation and regional development. So I think it's particularly on this work that she'll be speaking about today. So I could pass the floor over to Liliana. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Irene. Yes, I'll just start sharing then the presentation. Let me see if I can make this work properly. Let me know if you can't hear me as well, in case there's any issues. Let me see. Is that all right? Can you see it fine? Yeah, okay, thank you. So hi, everyone, and thank you so much for your interest in today's seminar. So as you know, I'm usually in the audience or organizing these seminars, but it is a pleasure to be able to present some of my research today. In the next 20 to 30 minutes or so, I'll present mostly on my doctoral research on the role of universities in innovation policies and practices. And like Irene introduced, it is part of Marie Curie ITN, which is the RUNIN project, as you can see in the slide. And this is on the role of universities in innovation and regional development. My thesis explored specifically how universities contribute to innovation policies and in the broadest sense to regional development, though through their interaction with subnational governments. But of course, if you are interested in this topic overall, I would recommend you to just take a look at the RUNIN website and see other aspects of this research that my fellow PhD colleagues have looked into. So yes, these are most of the people from the network. Some of RUNIN project members are present in this photo, and this includes both doctoral researchers, but also senior academics and also mentors from government institutions. This network enabled and strengthened my training as a researcher, so I had to kind of emphasize it here. It challenged me also several times to think about this problem from another perspective, and I cannot fail to highlight it, of course, as a part of my PhD journey. I wanted to also give a special thanks to Professor Paul Benneworth, which is a central figure in this photograph and in the RUNIN project, but also specifically in my working group, which is Policies and Interventions. And his comments and insights were very valuable, but I am sorry, of course, to hear about his unexpected departure in 2020. Regarding my presentation, it will have just the following structure. I will address first some of the context of the doctoral research, and in particular relevant points in the literature on regional development, innovation, universities, and public policies. And I'll follow this by a description of the research itself of the study and some of the contributions that it could have. So just to give you some general idea on the role of universities, some of you might be more aware than others, but this probably gives a good overview. When we talk about the role of universities, we should have some idea of its evolution. And this chronology demonstrates the creation of the first university with the University of Bologna in 1088. And in the following centuries, there was a first expansion in the creation of university institutions. These had as their main mission teaching or the transmission of knowledge, this being considered the first academic mission. And in the 19th century, there was the emergence of the Humboldtian model in Germany, which is considered the concept of inquiry-based teaching, with presenting universities with the knowledge production mission, or that is the second research mission. There has been a continuation of the massification of education in the last century, and more recently with the growing expectations regarding the capacity of universities to boost economic development and innovation dynamics, particularly at the regional level. There was the institutionalization of a third mission of interaction with the outside, namely for the exchange and application of knowledge to respond to societal and development challenges. And this refers, for example, to social, entrepreneurial, and collaborative activities carried out by universities with external partners, with a particular focus on the region where the university is located. So my research starts from this context, in which the university has a more expansive external orientation, not only with the massification of higher education, but with a greater openness to the outside and a prevalent role in society and in its region, as a more stable perennial institution, but that is able to face new challenges and stimulate regional development. So to understand how institutions such as universities can contribute to a region's innovation strategies and practices, it was important to explore how regional development also is currently theorized and how it can be operationalized. I focused on literature on governance, higher education, and institutionalism, but this research also delves into the economic and geographical aspects that frame this relationship, namely innovation and development in a regional context. So economic geography, the literature on economic geography is thus really useful for this, namely the theory of evolutionary economic geography. And EEG provides a model of dynamic change that can explain how an economic landscape changes over time and the processes that influence and drive that evolution. So specifically, it tries to clarify how geography and the micro processes and behaviors of economic agents are important in determining the development trajectory of the evolution of the economic system. Each development path is unique, with different types of regions, of course, demonstrating different challenges and advantages that affect their potential or capacity for innovation and development. And knowledge and innovation are central concepts to EEG, as knowledge is considered endogenous to the process of economic evolution. Knowledge is dynamic and is being constantly created, adapted, and transformed. And the introduction then of new knowledge into a regional economy can then alter its development trajectory. So the concept of a knowledge-based economy is central to my research, and as it emphasizes the role of knowledge in the dynamics of innovation and development, and especially the heightened role of institutions that deal with the production and distribution of knowledge, such as universities, in these dynamics. So the concept of the knowledge-based economy or knowledge society, as I mentioned, it parallels the greater openness to the outside in academia and universities. And new approaches to economic development have also emphasized the importance of knowledge and collective learning processes to drive innovation and competitiveness. This has resulted in the integration of concepts such as research and development, complementarity, specialization in development policy discourses, with innovation becoming a predominant policy objective, particularly in the EU scenario. The Smart Specialization Framework, introduced in the 2014-2020 period of the European Cohesion Policy, is one of the main examples of the integration of the knowledge economy concept and collaboration processes between multiple regional stakeholders. The role of universities is thus emphasized again, but directly linked to innovation policies, thus promoting greater involvement of these institutions in the political process. And this is an aspect that is sometimes a bit dismissed in university missions or when analyzing university external engagement, especially in the third mission, So with the interaction between universities and industry being the most explored often in the literature and in practice, since it is that aspect of interaction that has the potential to generate more profit and be evaluated in a more quantitative manner. Due to this context, there is thus a need to explore the potential contribution of universities in this interaction with regional and subnational government in the political process, and to analyze what roles universities assume, namely what governance roles, since they are entering this policy arena space. So despite not being a much explored area in the literature, there are still studies that demonstrate the roles that universities can assume in their participation in strategic processes of innovation and regional development. So I wanted to show you some examples, such as the ability to identify needs or gaps and provide information and analysis to support decision-making, the ability to provoke reflection, interactive learning and problem solving, and to facilitate network collaborations across multiple geographic levels as well. They are also seen as more of a neutral intermediary when you consider there are several stakeholders in a region that sometimes have more vested interests, not that universities are completely unbiased, but they are still considered generally more a more neutral mediator in this space. Of course, however, playing these roles is not without its barriers and limitations. I also present here some examples, which include limitations of geographic, institutional, and political context. These are mentioned, for example, in the work by Boucher et al. I didn't write them here, but I can write them after. They state that the age and size of university, the configuration of the higher education system in the region, and the governance context are factors that influence the university's contribution to the region. So in different regions with different levels of development and institutional configurations can also provide or limit not only the contribution potential of universities, but also possible development trajectories for the region. My thesis explores this issue further, detailing more the disadvantages and advantages of different categories of regions, such as peripheral or less developed regions. Other factors include the present institutional capacity, namely of the university. These are nevertheless somewhat determined by historical path dependence and therefore can be difficult to change. And finally, there's the political arena, which is a complex arena with bureaucratic or political barriers and with a natural variance arising from the political process, which may limit the university's interaction in this plan, in this space, and its overall contribution. So my research explores, like I said, the university's contribution to strengthening regional innovation dynamics through the analysis of the interaction between the university and regional subnational government in innovation and strategy processes. Innovation models generally focus on three main types of institutions in a region, namely the state, the university, and industry. This is the case of, maybe you've heard the triple helix model. And as mentioned, there is a great exploration sometimes of the interaction between university and industry. But in the context previously described, it is increasingly relevant to explore the interaction between university and state. And more specifically, in the case of this doctoral research between universities and regional and or subnational governments. So my argument is that this type of interaction has more tangible advantages to innovation that are often overlooked, related to building trust between actors and institutional capacities. So the main research question is how and under which conditions can university engagement in regional innovation policy processes address regional development barriers? And the ultimate objective of the study was thus to explore how this interaction can then address these barriers in the region and drive better regional development trajectories. As mentioned, the EEG approach has placed the research lens on the microprocesses of interaction that can influence economic development trajectories. And the literature review allowed for the identification of some mechanisms that can influence the dynamics of interaction between universities and regional governments. These are mechanisms of agency, leadership, and change. Agency can be characterized as more actions to or interventions to produce a desired social effect, as is influenced by past actions and a vision of the future. The concept of leadership is intrinsically linked to that of agency and does not depend on any formal management position. So it doesn't need to be a top manager of a certain institution to exert leadership. This can be also exercised collectively. It could be also exercised by researchers, for example. It can be what is called individual agency or entrepreneurial agency or place leadership when it's collective, exercised collectively. There is thus an objective of change in the exercise of agency or leadership, which is something characteristic in a strategy process, such as innovation policies. What do I mean by this? Is that when you want to exert some kind of social change, then you try to exert your agency and your leadership to achieve that. And that is very much what is tried then in a policy process in which a lot of stakeholders are gathered together collectively then change regional economic development. So as shown in the graphic, the inclusion of these mechanisms allowed this interaction to be more detailed. It is what I call like more bidirectional interaction with feedback loops, leading both the university and the regional government to be influenced by one another. And for example, universities can change their organizational architecture and the way they interact to adapt to external expectations. And in turn, this can help resolve internal tensions and drive the university's mission in a more cohesive way. The research itself was exploratory and mostly developed through a qualitative approach. The study design was based on individual case studies, but also on the comparison of several cases, the main ones being the University of Aveiro, the Autonomous University of Barcelona, and the University of Twente. Each of these universities is located in a different type of region. So respectively, the region of Aveiro or the region of Centro is considered as an underdeveloped and peripheral region in Portugal. The Twente region in the Netherlands is peripheral, but more developed, of course, and formerly industrial. And the region of Catalonia in Spain is more developed and much more centralized and metropolitan. Data collection methods included documentary sources, a database of funded projects and semi-structured interviews, and in total 88 interviews were conducted. This was a thesis by publication, including 7 works, both articles and book chapters, all already published. So if you just look me up or send me an email, I can link you to those. So as I mentioned, from the results, in the publications and the comparative analysis, relevant mechanisms in the interaction of universities in the innovation process were highlighted. These include mechanisms that were referred from the literature review, such as agency, leadership, and change, but also identified mechanisms such as alignment and legitimacy, which I can characterize a bit like the oil in the gears of an interaction process. So alignment emerges as a key mechanism in the interaction between university and regional government. It demonstrates dynamic of change and progression that requires maintaining more of a delicate balance between the two sides. A more balanced interaction then would allow for the university and regional government to further align themselves with the desired path, also for the region, one in which the potential for the regional contribution emerging from this relationship is enhanced. The legitimacy mechanism is understood here as the recognition and acceptance of leadership by another actor or institution. And this mechanism, therefore, needs both the university to assume leadership and to consolidate that internally, as well as materialize it externally and have this reflected, and the reflection of this agency, of course, in other regional stakeholders. So they have to look at the university and recognize it as a neutral mediator, for example, or more of a leader in certain processes. So through legitimacy, regional stakeholders recognize the university not only as another actor, but as a protagonist in the regional innovation policy process, an institution that is capable of providing guidance for collective regional action. So I know this model may seem a bit complicated right now, but I can explain it a bit better, but it's mostly trying to utilize all these different mechanisms and see how they can improve the relationship between university and regional government. So in the end, I proposed a final model for the interaction between the university and the regional government in the innovation policy process, and for how broader contribution to other regional stakeholders and to regional development itself can materialize from here. So this is a dynamic spiral model. And it is based on existing models, of course, such as the triple helix, but it is focused in the context of this interaction and in the context of innovation policies. In addition, this model considers the university's internal dynamics, which condition its collaboration with the outside world. So it moves from considering that the university should promote agency and alignment internally, and then this can improve their collaboration with the outside, namely with regional government, which in turn can improve their contribution to regional development overall. So some of the main findings, the results usually indicate that mechanisms, the ones that I mentioned, alignment, legitimacy, agency, and leadership, can contribute to strengthening of the role of universities in their interaction in innovation practices and policies, and the analysis of microprocesses. The analysis of microprocesses is useful to estimate the capacity that these institutions have in different contexts and institutions. And relationships are interactions. So the activation of change processes, both internal and external to the university, through this type of interaction ends up contributing to the support of innovation and regional development dynamics. And I can exemplify some of these in the next slide. So here, I have some of the results from each of the institutions that I've analyzed, the main universities, so the University of Aveiro, University of Twente, and the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And you can see that some of the estimated regional impact was not just tangible in the sense of quantifiable, but also intangible. There was building of interinstitutional capacity, provision of support infrastructure, and promotion of multi-level collaborative networks. These examples come from the research work for each of the case studies, and they demonstrate how in regions with different levels of development, these benefits can still materialize. But these results also demonstrate how many of these benefits that come from this interaction, of course, can be immaterial and difficult to sometimes really quantify. It denotes the importance of also considering a new perspective of innovation. So I can also explain this a bit further, maybe in the discussion part, but I'll just move on to other of the findings. Results also demonstrate that the involvement with regional government and alignment with the innovation policy process, it stimulated a rethinking of the institutional and organizational structures of universities themselves. So as I mentioned, those feedback loops, in their interaction, universities are also influenced then by the expectations that regional government has, or by certain guidelines within innovation policy. As an example, the University of Aveiro created the position of pro-rector for regional development. The Autonomous University of Barcelona created these core horizontal structures across university faculties and departments to stimulate internal coherence for external collaboration. So there were these changes internally to the organizational structure of the universities. Based on all the comparative work, results showed that the opportunities and challenges in the analyzed interaction between university and regional government also depend on the geographic context and institutional capacity, but with greater positive potential, of course, when mechanisms of alignment, legitimacy, agency, and leadership are considered. So how could we stimulate this? And finally, I just have some recommendations based on challenges that could be relevant. So these are not extensive, but some of the ones that sometimes come up more. So first challenge would be, how could we promote regional academic engagement with policymakers? So of course, there's needs to consider multiple types of benefits, and also need to consider the strengths within the university itself, the capacity that it has, and what can it promote. So training and regional engagement is one of them, reflecting this in career evaluation. Another challenge would be, how could we create and enable a policy framework that can facilitate then matching university strengths or assets and capacities to the needs of the region. Of course, smart specialization already tries to do this somewhat, but there's a need also to consider this at the university institutional level and the regional government level too. A need for a more strategic focus on areas of regional economic relevance. This can also make it more appealing sometimes for universities with a more international orientation to see that there is an opportunity for excellence also at the regional level. There's also the inclusion of collaborative methodologies that can make the most of the networks that these institutions already have as well. Another challenge would be, how could we activate universities' regional engagement and leadership? Promoting bottom-up leadership or agency within the university is very helpful for this, making sure that there's autonomy of employees for engaging with the outside, and of course, trying to make this cohesive in some way with university strategy and with the needs of the region. And lastly, how to enable university engagement and specifically regional innovation strategy processes. There's just one point here on clarifying universities' input in these processes. So sometimes, at least from the studies that I carried out, there is sometimes people are unaware of what exactly is going on in these strategy processes, and they could be useful for regional government itself to make it more clear where exactly would they need the input from academics, from other technical support from the university, and so on. So I hope to continue the discussion with you, and this is my presentation. Feel free to email me or see the RUNIN project website as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Can I open things up to anybody that's got any questions or comments they would like to follow up? Hopefully, I'll notice any hands up, or if I don't pick up on it, feel free just to shout as well. I don't think there was anything immediately in the chat, so if nobody had any points just at the moment, there was one question I could maybe ask to start off with. In the case, we're based in Glasgow predominantly, and here there's, you know, quite a lot of universities for given the size of the city. And did you notice in the other case study regions, were they sort of one university of many? And I was just wondering whether some universities in a city or a region can have a maybe stronger link with the regional authority if they are the only big university in that area and there's that more direct obvious link, or if you're kind of one of many, is it a kind of maybe a bit more of a dilute process? It may be not something that you looked specifically at in your research, but be quite interesting to know your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Irene. Yes, so this is something I did research, and it's also something that other academics have looked into. So I mentioned one which is, well, a few from a paper called, now I forget, but it's from Bocher et al., I think from 2003. I can put the link maybe in a follow-up email. But basically, they do consider also the number of universities in a region and how this can affect their engagement with other stakeholders in regional government. And by analyzing also 3 different universities in such different areas, I was able to see, yeah, some difference. So I would say where there's only one university in a region, it's a lot easier to make that connection and to strengthen that connection with regional governments and these strategies, especially. So the Autonomous University of Barcelona would be the example for the other extreme, because there's a lot of universities in Barcelona and in Catalonia that in some way you can say that they compete for this type of relationship, and it is more diluted. So of course, one university can have maybe a specialty in a specific area, so they are called more to that area, and another for another area. It doesn't mean that there cannot be a relationship itself, but sometimes this is more diluted, and they're not as present throughout the process, the innovation policy process itself. Also, one of the things that came out of this particular case of the Autonomous University of Barcelona is that because they didn't have such a privileged, let's say, connection with the regional government, they try to focus more on local links. So surrounding, really immediately in the surrounding of their campus. So sometimes local government can be an easier approach in that case. So yes, it does influence a lot.
No, thanks. No, that's great. I think got a question there from Bryony, if you want to go ahead.
Thanks. Hi, Liliana. This
Hi.
was lovely, and obviously I've followed your research for a while, as well as the RUNIN project. But now that I reflect more on being at a small regional university, I think it hit differently for me this time. And I mean, one reflection for me was around the role of universities and social innovation. For example, my university has just bought out one of the empty buildings vacated by a closed chain of malls, and they're going to use this as part of a sort of regeneration for the town centre involving co-hosting the local library. So I think there are some ways that are maybe a little bit outside of classic innovation policy that universities might be engaging with at a regional level. But the question that I really wanted to ask is, can you say perhaps a little bit more about how the different agendas line up here? So I represent our university on a subgroup of our LEP, our local economic partnership in the region. And although we are the regional university, interestingly, Gloucestershire actually has 2 other universities. Who knew? But they're both really small agricultural universities. And of course, we have the subgroup for agriculture and rural business. And it's interesting that when I talk to the other members of that group who don't come from universities, they're always really annoyed, because what they say is often our conversations just end up with what the universities really want is a new opportunity to start up a new course and recruit some more students. So we'll be sort of developing these kind of regional innovation policies that end up being what we need is skills. Oh, we've got skills. And they sort of wondered whether you could say a little bit more about how you can make those relationships perhaps a bit more constructive rather than everybody trying to get their own little piece, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you, Bryony, and thank you for attending today as well. It's a pleasure to have you here. Yes, so in these interactions, one thing that I mentioned, and maybe I wasn't so clear about in the presentation itself, is how this type of interaction is definitely kind of a power arena. So it's characterized by power dynamics, as policy arenas often are. And you have these all these stakeholders coming together, and all of them have their different interests and different they all want a piece of the pie, right? But you never really know how to really balance this. So one of the things that I mentioned in the thesis is like this kind of like push and pull dynamic. So you have to really make sure that you have a sort of balance and sort of alignment that is in an ideal world, one that is going to make sure to appeal to all of the stakeholders and also make sure that there's regional economic development for the region. So one of the things that has come up in order to make this a bit more productive is, of course, then to try to have more of this alignment with strategies and with unique areas of strength in the region and within the university. So, for example, you mentioned they are focused more on the skills and on getting the students, but there are also probably other institutions, for example, industries that would be also interested in having that sort of those sort of skills also trained up. So that would be one of the things that could be focused on in a strategy. And okay, we can follow up this with a working package, but not be the only central focus. Of course, we have other focuses, other strengths that the industry, that the universities can bring to the table, and also try to pull a bit on those as well. So one of the things I mentioned is like to clarify the kind of inputs that we want from universities, and in this sense is also from other stakeholders that we want that sort of agency is like saying, hey, we also are interested in having some training on your part to this technical process. Or we are interested in you developing some sort of, whether it's a living lab or some other kind of structure to promote this. So it's also like making sure that you come to these institutions and say, hey, we really would appreciate if you would be able to develop this or help us develop this, and try to then more develop build up this institutional capacity or this interinstitutional capacity, which is sometimes only done when you kind of push on these expectations. And it's true that not all institutions have these capacities, but it's good to kind of get the ball rolling somehow. I hope this is helpful. Yes.
I noticed there's a question, I think, from Odelia in the chat. Odelia, I don't know whether you want to just ask it yourself or whether you're happy for me to just relay it. Give you a moment to. I can just ask. For the Dutch case that you covered, was it specifically universities that was the focus, or there's also the higher vocational education institutions? Did they get taken into account in the work?
So in the research itself, in all my research, whether it's in the Dutch case or another one, I just looked at universities, so not at vocational institutions, though of course, I mean, the University of Aveiro also has polytechnical institutes within it, but in the Dutch case, it was only the University of Twente, so I did not look at other universities or higher vocational education institutions.
Yeah.
Though they did come up sometimes, of course, when doing interviews on how differently they might approach their engagement with the region, which is interesting in itself. It's something that could be explored, of course, in other research. But yeah, it was only the University of Twente.
That's a sign of interesting research when you've always got lots of other questions you then
Yeah.
want to go on and ask.
That's true.
Linda also had a question, particularly looking at the experience of the last 2 to 3 years. I don't know, again, Linda, whether you wanted to ask it yourself or whether, yes, you're there. That's cool. Cool to get another voice and a different face. There we are. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Irene. Liliana, that was really interesting. I enjoyed your presentation there. Thank you. Just looking into the future a wee bit, obviously all of the institutions you talk about and everywhere, everyone has been deeply affected by the experience of the COVID pandemic. How do you see that influencing the relationships that you talked about this morning?
Thank you, Linda. And thank you for your question. Yes. Well, it's true that my research kind of stopped a bit before the COVID pandemic. So a lot of these things that came up after and a lot of the ways the universities were influenced, it wasn't something that I had terrain experience on. So one of the things that I've noticed is that there's a lot more of an emphasis, and maybe not just related to the COVID pandemic, but to the overall policy discourse right now, more emphasis on missions-based engagement. So there's the sense, okay, that universities can have more of a role to play in these societal changes and in making sure that the surrounding area is developing right, is taken care of in a way, is supported. There's a lot of cases of universities actually making sure that there's enough masks, so that there's research going into this area of behavior, healthcare, and social behavior in terms of how to behave in like a pandemic situation, lockdown, and things like that. So there is the sense that universities can have positive impact or can affect their surroundings in a positive way by then performing this external engagement as well in a more societal mission focus. So that's one of the things that I see coming out of it. And I also think that universities have maybe other roles to play as well still in the future related to, of course, sustainability, not just related to health in terms of COVID. So I see at least the future as looking promising in the sense that there's more openness to the outside increasingly, and there's more this connection that one wants to have with the region, of course, because it's mutually beneficial. Of course, if your region is thriving, then the university will thrive as well. And so international orientation is not the end all be all, of course, though that recognition is very useful for universities. It's also important to take care of the needs that are around you. Yeah. But I know, sorry to not have more detail regarding the COVID pandemic, but I know that there's been a lot of discussion on this in Norway. So maybe that would be something that if you want to take a look at, we could see.
I guess you were quite lucky to have been finishing your fieldwork before all of this. It wasn't really something that I had thought of in terms of a sort of COVID impact, but on the poor unfortunate souls who are doing sort of 2-3 year studies, and they hit that period where all patterns and trends and things that you would maybe be studying that suddenly got stood on their head. But yes, it's quite an interesting element to it all. And
I'm talking about like positive impacts as well, or in terms of external engagement, but of course COVID has impacted universities in also very negative ways, and specifically when you consider the students and how they were kind of deprived of that connection, of course, when they're starting their studies in a pandemic situation. That will impact the academic community overall. So it's something that has to be built up again.
And things like flows of international students that kind of bring a lot into a region get sort of so disrupted and things.
There's a sense of community that it's difficult sometimes to achieve after being online for so long, but it is very important also to stimulate this engagement with the region.
And as you say, I mean, can you see maybe going into the future, there was obviously the kind of focus on innovation, smart specialization, which is linked to the wider trends in regional policy. But now as well, there's this kind of increased focus on kind of well-being as part of the sort of regional development package, and you know, it's that sort of wider view. It's not just sort of GDP, economic development, if you see what I mean, and I guess universities can hook into that in various ways as well.
Yeah, it's something that is increasingly emphasized, right? You mentioned smart specialization framework, and yeah, they are now considering more maybe the less quantifiable aspects of innovation, like more social innovation, sustainability, inclusion, transition overall. So there's this, maybe it is even a bigger expectation now being put on regional stakeholders overall, but also universities, to consider that these strategies need to be transformative. So you can't just keep going with the same formula that had been applied until now, but there needs to be like a broader consideration of systemic change. So it is a new challenge, but I do think that there is already a lot of experience coming from the last period that can be built upon. So there's already this collective, the beginnings of collective leadership, at least between all these stakeholders in a region. And there's, you know, increasing also investment in innovation and different forms of cooperation between regions, and even between countries, and to create really a European research area. So I see that as having good prospects, at least in terms of the university's role as well.
Yeah.
So
you mentioned one more, just while we have a little bit of time, one more question I had was one of the examples, I forget which one it was, you mentioned them having was it a sort of somebody at the sort of central level of the university with a specific remit for sort of regional development involved. I mean, were they sort of involved in sort of the liaison bit with the region, but also looking across university departments and pulling things together and identifying where there was the region? What did they do basically? And you know, do you think there's kind of lessons where that could be applied in other university contexts?
Yes, so I think the example was of the University of Aveiro, where they created a position of a pro-rector for regional development. And that is considering, so you have, of course, the head of the university, which in Portugal we call rector. And then you have all this supportive council. And these are also made up of pro-rectors, and they're focusing on specific areas, but the one for regional development was quite recent. I believe it was in the last 8 to 10 years that it was created. And yeah, the main idea was to really have them engage with regional government or local or sub-regional authorities. So to then liaise on these types of strategies and on potential projects that can come up. So really a focus on regional development, which was quite interesting. Part of their work as well, of course, is to make sure that it has more of it is more policy focused. So sometimes these pro-rectors come more from disciplines of geography, policy, or political science, and things like that. But it is supposed to be a position that brings together different strengths of the university across departments. So there's this internal organization or cohesiveness that is attempted through this. Of course, there's other examples of these kinds of either positions or organizational structures emerging from this external engagement with regional government or in regional strategies. At the University of Aveiro, you also had technological platforms, and these were created kind of in alignment with smart specialization areas of the region. So they were horizontal structures, or supposed to be horizontal structures that would bring together then strengths from different departments for a specific theme. And this could be social innovation, or it could be, for example, materials in terms of engineering and things like that. Yeah, it would be one of the examples as well. Of course, the Autonomous University of Barcelona has done this with so-called core structures. So again, it was focusing on not just smart specialization areas of the region, but also horizon broader themes to kind of facilitate this cohesiveness within the university, so that it would facilitate then applying for grants and making sure that there's this collaboration already ongoing for particular themes. I know that I think there was one on bicycles at the University of Aveiro, and so that was very specific. There was, I think, one on health, if I'm not mistaken, at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. So yes, you would have these themes that they try to develop horizontal coordination within the university to then engage with regional government. So yeah.
It'll be interesting to see if Strathclyde Uni has a deputy vice principal for regional something or other.
Yeah. Something to
Super.
look into,
Well,
definitely.
yeah, if there weren't any other questions, there's lots of thanks to you for the presentation being repeated in the chat there, and people sort of apologising for having to go on to other meetings and things, but that's been really interesting and informative, and it'd be interesting as well to see how the work kind of carries on in the future as well, hopefully. Yeah, so thanks very much. Also, just to remind folk that our next webinar is on the 14th of December on the EU's sort of rediscovery of services of general interest, which should hopefully be of general interest to folk, particularly during this sort of times of crisis and change, and it's presented by Dr. Alice Humer. So yes, please contact us to register on the mailing list if you want any more information and keep up to date with future events. But yes, I'll finish off again by saying thanks to Liliana and for everyone for joining us today. So thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone.
See you later.
Have a good
Bye.
day.
Bye.
Bye.